It is Friday. It's the 25th of July. I'm Moon Geun-hye. This is ARIRANG News live from Seoul. Our top stories today. President Park Geun-hye calls Japan's wartime sexual slavery a violation of universal women's rights that needs to be resolved accordingly. Now, this as a UN panel urges Japan to make an apology and take full responsibility. Impossible to determine the cause of death. That's the Korean State Forensic Agency's conclusion on its investigation into the death of the fugitive shipping tycoon allegedly responsible for April's ferry disaster. And reports indicate debris from the Air Algérie plane that went missing over northern Mali with 116 on board has been found about 50 kilometers from the Mali-Burkina Faso border. We'll have those stories and more, but first, let us begin this Friday afternoon at the nation's top office. President Park Geun-hye, during talks with the visiting governor of Tokyo earlier today, asked him to help Korea and Japan improve their strained ties by sharing correct historical perspectives. Well, during talks with Governor Yoichi Masuzoe, who is on a three-day trip aimed at bettering bilateral relations between Seoul and Tokyo, President Park expressed regret about the inappropriate remarks some Japanese politicians have made over historical matters. Now, she specifically referred to the unsettled issue of Korean women forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military during World War II. She said it was a universal human rights matter that demanded attention. A UN panel is urging Japan to provide a public apology and compensation to the victims of its wartime system of sex slavery. The call comes as two elderly victims continue their mission in the U.S. to raise awareness about the horrors they faced. Here's our Park Ji-won.
Two victims of Japan's wartime system of sexual slavery visited the city of Glendale in California this week. It's where a monument dedicated to them and the thousands of other victims, a bronze statue of a young girl dressed in traditional Korean clothing, is set up.
Please help us, the victims, receive an apology before we all die.
Lee Ok-soon says she was abducted by Japanese soldiers when she was only 15 and sent to a military brothel. To this day, the Japanese government denies its military operated the brothels, despite a huge amount of evidence that shows the military did. The two women, now in their late 80s, spoke out against some Japanese Americans and Japanese officials who want the statue removed.
They're saying really inhumane things.
Both women will stay in the U.S. for another couple of weeks. They will travel to Virginia and New Jersey and to other monuments set up in memory of all those who suffered under Japan's cruel system of sexual slavery. Meanwhile, a UN panel is urging Japan to provide a public apology and compensation to the victims of its wartime sex slave victims before it's too late. The UN Human Rights Committee said Thursday, after reviewing the records of several countries, it's concerned about the re-victimization of the former sex slavery victims. The panel criticized the Japanese government for continuously denying its responsibility and even defaming the victims, rather than taking the necessary steps to help them. The committee, made up of 18 independent experts, also noted that every compensation claim brought by victims has been dismissed, and every call to ask for independent investigation on the sex slavery has been rejected in Japan. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
It appears that the cause of death of a fugitive solo ferry owner Yoo Byung-hun will remain a mystery. Korea's National Forensic Service says the body was far too decomposed for them to determine what caused him to die. In a nationally televised press briefing earlier today, the director of that agency said they had failed to find whether Yoo had died of disease or he had been strangled to death, as there was too little evidence left on his body. Well, the agency, which had been running tests on the corpse since receiving it on Tuesday, did manage to rule out the possibility that Yu had died from drugs or from being poisoned. The State Forensic Agency also reaffirmed that the body was in fact that of the fugitive ferry owner amid growing public suspicions that the body might not be his. Yu, who disappeared shortly after the Seoul ferry disaster, was found dead last month in an orchid in southwestern Korea. Well, before voters head to the polls for Korea's largest ever by-elections next Wednesday, a two-day early voting has started today. The polls opened at 6 a.m. this morning, beginning at the race that has greater significance coming off local elections in June, where no party could claim victory. Connie Kim reports.
2 days of early voting for the July 30th by-elections has begun. Those that cast ballots today and tomorrow will help determine the winners in Korea's largest ever by-elections, where 15 parliamentary seats are up for grabs. 6 of the vacant seats are in Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province, and analysts say winning the upper hand in those races may very well determine who won the greater election. And according to the last opinion poll results released on Wednesday, the ruling Saenuri Party is in the pole position. In Seoul's Dongjakbi constituency, considered a barometer of public sentiment in the capital, the ruling party candidate is in the lead. However, there's a lot of road between now and next Wednesday. 2 opposition candidates bowed out of their respective races on Thursday to circle the wagons around the liberal candidate. The field has narrowed in the Dongjakbi race, where at last check, the ruling party candidate Na Kyung-won had an overwhelming lead. Candidate Ki Dong-min of the main opposition party has dropped out and thrown his support behind the Justice Party candidate No Hye-chan in hopes of boosting the opposition's chance of winning. The Justice Party candidate in the Suwon-di constituency of Gyeonggi-do province also dropped his candidacy on Thursday, making it largely a 2-horse race between the ruling party's Im Tae-hee and the main opposition's Park Gwang-won. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
Now, Korea's consumer sentiment has taken 2 steps backward. The index that measures the overall economic outlook of consumers remains fastened at the same level recorded in the weeks immediately following the Seoul ferry disaster. This despite an improvement a month earlier. Now, officials say consumer sentiment is being affected by the central bank's recent downgrade of its economic outlook for this year. Our Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
The Korean government is putting forth its best efforts to shore up economic sentiment, but so far those efforts are not bearing fruit. The Bank of Korea said Friday that the nation's consumer sentiment index stood at 105 in July, down 2 points from a month earlier. The figure had rebounded in June, suggesting that Korean consumers might be returning to their spending habits, which changed after April's ferry tragedy. The index hovered at around the 108 level in the first 4 months of this year, but dropped to 105 in May following the disaster. The figure returned to that level this month, and experts say that reflects the nation's still sluggish domestic demand. The monthly index is a gauge of the overall economic outlook of consumers, their living conditions, and future spending plans. A reading over 100 means optimists outnumber pessimists. A recent poll by Nielsen showed that Korea's consumer sentiment is near the bottom among 60 countries worldwide. The figures cast a cloud over President Park's new economic team and their attempts to pull the economy out of a low-growth rut by boosting domestic demand. While announcing plans to pump money into the economy in the second half of this year, Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan also pledged to map out the budget for next year in an expansionary manner. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
All of the day's important events close to home and around the world. Join Moon Gon-young live from Seoul.
Mobile shopping market for the dual use of the Korean name East Sea and the Japanese name Sea of Japan in school textbooks in the state of Virginia. In developing news, authorities have tracked down the wreckage of the Algerian passenger plane that crashed in southern Mali on Thursday. There are no signs of survivors. Connie Lee reports.
A plane that went missing early Thursday has been found. The wreckage of Air Algerie Flight 5017 has been spotted in Mali, according to officials.
The team has confirmed it has seen the remains of the plane, totally burned out and scattered on the ground. Sadly, the team saw no one on site. It saw no survivors.
It is possible that some parts of the aircraft were seen by locals in dune areas, near the village of Bosi in Mali. All this information will be confirmed after inquiries.
It was supposed to be a 4-hour overnight flight from Ouagadougou to Algiers, Algeria. But the flight, carrying 116 people on board, including French and Spanish nationals, lost radar contact just 50 minutes after takeoff, and now found crashed in Mali. Bad weather is being suspected as a cause. The flight had asked to change its route before losing contact because of a storm. The Air Algerie crash is the third plane disaster in a week. Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 was brought down by a surface-to-air missile in Ukraine 1 week ago. And Taiwan's TransAsia Flight 222 crashed amid inclement weather on Wednesday. The death toll from all three crashes exceeds 400. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
Now, relations between the U.S. and Russia are at their lowest 7 years over the crisis in Ukraine, of course, but there's another potential flashpoint developing right here in Northeast Asia. It involves Washington's plan to deploy an advanced missile defense system in South Korea, and Russia is not happy about it. But as our Shin Se-min reports, the U.S. says the missile defense system will not target Russia.
The U.S. will press ahead with plans to deploy a high-altitude anti-ballistic missile defense system in South Korea to defend against North Korea's continuous missile threats. The U.S. government on Thursday dismissed Russia's concerns that the deployment of the Terminal High-Altitude Area Defense Battery, or THAAD, could trigger an arms race in Northeast Asia and make it more difficult to resolve issues. Russia's foreign ministry said the plan will inevitably have a negative impact on the region. Responding to that, the U.S. State Department stressed the defense system is not aimed at Russia. It added the U.S. is committed to missile defense cooperation with Moscow, which will eventually enhance the security of NATO and Russia. The top commander for U.S. forces in Korea asked the Pentagon in June to deploy THAAD to Korea.
Study, but there's consideration being taken in order to consider THAAD being deployed here in Korea. It was a U.S. initiative. In fact, I recommended it as the commander. With North Korea's evolving threat, we obviously continuously look at ways that we can improve the defense of South Korea.
In May, the Wall Street Journal reported that Washington had conducted a site survey for possible deployment locations for the THAAD system, but no final decision had been made. THAAD, a key part of the U.S. missile defense system, can intercept enemy forces' mid-range ballistic missiles in mid-air. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
North Korea has filed an official complaint with the United Nations claiming the latest UN Security Council resolution on the regime's short-range missile launches is unjustified. Well, this is according to Yonhap News Agency. The letter sent earlier this week claims it is unfair and intolerable for the global body to criticize Pyongyang for firing short-range missiles as it's purely defensive in nature. North Korea claimed that the UN is turning a blind eye to the joint military drills between Seoul and Washington, which it says is clearly aimed at attacking the North, and added that the issue must be addressed by the UN Security Council. In response, South Korea said the UN has no plans to call a meeting despite Pyongyang's request. Now, Korea's rapid rate of economic development in recent decades has corresponded to a better quality of life. The UN Development Program ranks Korea 15th out of 187 countries in its Human Development Index. While the index measures the long-term outlook for 3 dimensions of human development: a long and healthy life, access to knowledge, and a decent standard of living. Norway topped the list, followed by Australia and Switzerland. However, on the downside of things, nearly 1 in 10 of Korea's senior citizens are likely to suffer from some type of dementia, which is a rate that's much higher than in neighboring countries. New findings from Seoul National University Bundang Hospital show that the prevalence rate for dementia among Koreans aged 65 and above stands at 9.2%. Now, that's more than 2 times higher than the average of 4.2% for all of Southeast Asia and higher than China's rate of 7.6%. The researchers analyzed 11 journals on dementia between 1990 and 2013. Alzheimer's was the most prevalent form at 5.7%. The findings were published in the July edition of the Journal of Korean Medical Sciences. Well, Korea's biggest celebration of genre cinema kicked off last week and will run until Sunday and has been delighting audiences with its mix of fantasy, horror, comedy, and much more. Well, the Busan International Fantastic Film Festival, or PFAN for short, is now in its 18th year and will hand out its awards as well as screen its closing film later today. However, the festival is still on throughout the weekend, so there is still time to catch some films. And film lovers also seem to be very excited about the latest local blockbuster to hit the screens, as period action film Gundo, the Age Rampant, opened to enormous numbers this week. Joining us to share his experience at PFAN and perhaps recommend a few films for the remaining days of the event is our film critic, Piers Conran. Hello there, Piers.
Hi, Kanya. How are you?
I'm good, and I see that you are doing well as well at the venue of PFAN. It sure looked like the stars were out in force for the opening ceremony last week, and the festival has been going on for about a week, and it sure looks like it had a lot in store for us this year. So, first of all, how does it feel to be back at PFAN?
Well, it feels great. You know, Busan is, of course, the biggest festival in Korea. That happens every October. But for me, PFAN is very special. It's my favorite festival. It was the first festival I came to when I visited Korea for the first time. So it's my third time on the trot, and it's always a really, really great time.
Right. You know, I was able to get a glimpse of the opening ceremony last week, and like I said, it was definitely a star-studded event. Did you get to catch a glimpse of that as well?
Absolutely. So yes, the opening ceremony took place last Thursday. And the opening film was a German film called Stereo, but the big focus, of course, was all the big stars that hit the red carpet. So every year, what PFAN does is they give some special awards to some big stars. So there's the Producers Award, which is given by the Korean Film Producers Association. And this year, the recipients were Hyunbin, who just returned from his military service, and he was in The Fatal Encounter earlier this year, and Son Ye-jin, who will next be seen in The Pirates, which is out in about 2 weeks' time. Also, there's the Bucheon Award, which is kind of an audience award for younger stars, and those were given to Kim Woo-bin and Shin Moon-kyung, who is also serving as the PFAN lady this year. And kind of the Rising Star Award went to Cho Jin-woong, who played the villain in A Hard Day. So they were all there to accept their awards, and they were joined by a number of other very special guests.
Well, Piers, you know, this unique film festival takes place just nearby Seoul in Gyeonggi-do province. And I remember you telling me that PFAN is just the right place to beat the summer heat, as it presents the best in genre cinema for those hungry cinephiles. Now, first, for those of us who are not too familiar with it, can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Absolutely. So along with the Busan and Jeonju International Film Festivals, it's one of this trifecta of big festivals in Korea. And it's also considered the biggest fantastic film festival in Asia. A fantastic film festival is one that focuses on genre cinema. So as we say, thrillers, horrors, sometimes some romantic comedies, fantasy, and lots of kind of more special stuff like that. So there's really something for everyone in this kind of festival. And PFAN really has an enormous amount of, it's a very dynamic festival. It also has a project market, so a lot of special guests who come from around the world. And there's loads of sidebar events, so there's really is something for everyone that enjoys film.
Well, what would you say are some of the things that you were most looking forward to at this year's PFAN?
Well, as with every year, there's always so much I want to see and so little time to see everything. So, of course, I have to kind of try and choose wisely, but there were a lot of films I was excited for. The competition section, which is called Puchon Choice, had a lot of interesting films, including there was a digital thriller, Open Windows, the Australian horror, The Babadook, which if anyone is a fan of horror should absolutely watch this. It was absolutely terrifying. I was watching it through my fingers the whole time. So that's a great one. There's also some showcases. There's a retrospective of Godzilla films. It's his 60th anniversary as a character. There's Latin American genre cinema, and also a showcase of the kind of Italian erotic filmmaker Tinto Brass. Those are quite special, but also a really good time at a festival like this.
Well, if you found that film, scary, I don't think I will be able to check it out. But like you mentioned, film festivals tend to have various sidebar events, such as content markets and the like. What about PFAN? What goes on beyond the films?
Well, the big thing that happens besides PFAN is an industry market called NAF, and that's the Network of Asian Fantastic Films. And what that is a project market. So you have this year, we had 27 projects were invited to kind of pitch their new works. You'd have a filmmaker, maybe a producer there as well, and they would talk about these films they want to make. And they'd be the people that they would be talking to are distribution people, production people from around the world. So there's many, many guests. There were something like 500 meetings took place, and 6 of those were a special spotlight on Thai cinema. So previous films that have been in this market include last year's A Terror Live. So these films really can become very big blockbusters. So it handed this closed on Wednesday. It handed out its awards, and hopefully we'll see some of those new projects on the screen in the coming years.
Well, like I said, what about for those of us who are not too much into gore or scary films? I mean, is PFAN still a good destination for those of us who are, chickens, I suppose?
Absolutely. I mean, there is plenty of horror cinema, and there's some very special gory cinema, but there's loads of other things as well. There's a lot of kind of films that are more fantastical. There are rom-coms that have kind of special fantasy elements. There's also a special section of animation called Anifanta. And anyone that wants to have kind of a good time, you can come. There's various events and parties. There's kind of cosplay, things going on, kind of, costume dress-up events. And so there's really a bit of everything. Also some classic films and a lot of, mild stuff as well. It's not just crazy things going on here.
Well, definitely, it seems like there is something for everybody, including myself, so I might really go check it out this weekend. But Piers, I want to talk about one film that's just been sweeping across the cinemas here in Korea, and it's Gundo, Age of the Rampant. It opened this week, and I'm sure you're aware it's doing very, very well. What do you make of its success?
Indeed, it's been an absolutely huge film. It opened on Wednesday. It had 550,000 admissions, which is actually an opening day record, beating the record that had been held by Transformers 3 since 2011. Now, I'm not all that surprised. It has big names, Ha Jung-woo and Kang Dong-won. It's it's a very appealing film with lots of comedy and action and period spectacle. And now, following what has been a relatively slow year for Korean films, this comes as a big boost for the industry. So I think everyone's happy to see it do so well. And I imagine it'll do very well into the weekend. I think it's poised to have an enormous debut, and perhaps it'll have set a new record for opening weekend.
Well, I know that, you have been talking about this film for quite some time. I think you first mentioned of this film earlier this year and, told us all that this is one that we should be on the lookout for, and it looks like, that was right. Well, Piers, thanks for another very powerful Real Talk session, and we look forward to having you back in the studio next Friday. That was our film critic, Piers Conran, live from the Puchon International Fantastic Film Festival. Thank you, Piers.
Good afternoon. The rain has subsided for the moment in the nation's capital, but as you can see here, rain clouds from up north will move down northwards into the central region later this afternoon, bringing rain along with it. Now, the amount of rain that we're expecting until tomorrow in the central region is up to 60 millimeters, while both Chungcheong provinces and the southern regions can expect up to 40. Now, besides that, the highs will be similar to yesterday, although there is no breeze like yesterday, so it may feel a bit hotter. Now, going over to our readings for today, Seoul will peak out at 30 this afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will hit 33 and 29 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island will top out at 35. Dokdo hits 28, while Mankungang tops out to the mid-20s. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you, Kanyang.
Well, thank you, Michelle, for that. And that's just about all for me at this hour. I'm Moon Gon-young. Check back with us at 4 p.m. Korea time for Business Today.